Hi everyone, hope you guys are doing well. This is James from Divine Crochet. Welcome to my channel. For today's video, I want to make my first slip stitch jumper. Now, this has been on my to-do list for ages now, just because slip stitches, whilst it's very time consuming, is one of the best stitches to make crochet clothing out of. Now, I've never worked with slip stitches before, so whilst I will tell you guys in detail what I'm doing, I wouldn't really call this a tutorial because I am still trying to figure stuff out. I don't have an awful big plan as to how I'm actually going to do it at the moment, so you guys can come with me along the process of making all of those decisions. I was inspired to finally pluck up the courage to make this jumper because I saw one of my favourite creators, Granny Gaia, make a mock neck out of slip stitches. It came out so cute, and I feel like that was a final deciding factor of me actually pushing forward to doing this project. So the game plan is to use a large hook size and chunky yarn, and I think with how slip stitches work, that will actually create a really nice looking jumper. So I'm gonna have a think as to what my game plan is, and then I'll take you guys on the journey from there. Before we get into the video, make sure you're subscribed because I'm now posting every Monday. Make sure you also like and comment on this video. I'll also have all of my other social media platforms linked in my description below, as well as my Etsy store where I sell crochet patterns. When it comes to actually making the jumper, I don't really have a super structured plan. All I know is I have this cream Aran acrylic yarn that has been sitting in my stash for ages that I just really want to use up. The plan is that I want to use that for the whole jumper, but I'm not 100% sure that I will have enough. So the backup plan is I will use a different kind of yarn for the sleeves, but I won't really think about it too much till I kind of get there. Without any further ado, we'll just get straight into making the front and back panel. So our first step is going to be to create this slip stitch front and back panel. For this panel I used Aran yarn and a 6.5mm hook. You can use any yarn that you would like. I would just recommend using a hook size that's about 1.5mm bigger. Our first step in creating the body of this jumper is to chain the total height of the front and back panel, and obviously you can customize this to whatever you want. I found with these panels you had to chain a much longer length than your final desired size. After doing a total of 55, what I'm going to do is do my 56th chain and tighten it like so, not quite to make a knot, but just to make the chain a lot smaller than it would be otherwise. So now the slip stitches for my second row are going to be worked into the back bump of the chain. That 56th chain that we did is going to be our turning chain, so you want to make sure that the first slip stitch you do is in the second chain away from your hook, which for me would have been my 55th stitch. Because I chained 55 and then my 56th chain was my turning chain, I should have a total of 55 slip stitches when it comes to this first row. Once you've reached your final stitch, you can go ahead and do a turning chain of just one, and I do the same thing where I tighten this chain just so it doesn't kind of stick out and look too pronounced. And then we're going to turn our work. And now all of our slip stitches are going to be in this back loop here. So every time you insert your hook should only be going underneath one loop, and that's this back loop or the back V of the V's that are made at the top of these slip stitches. Now this can be quite tricky to get used to, but once you get in the hang of it, it's actually not that hard to do. But whether you're used to this stitch or not, we're just going to be stacking one stitch on top of each other, working side to side. And then once we do our final slip stitch, we'll do the same thing again, where we chain one, and then we can turn our work, and again work into that slip stitch, and only in the back loop. I did want to mention that around the fourth row, your stitches might become a little bit harder to differentiate because of the way that these stitches are stacked. So around row 4, I would start to pay a little bit more attention to where your hook is entering and just double check that it is going into the back loop and not creeping into a row or a stitch that it shouldn't. Now we're familiar with the stitch, I'm going to go ahead and show you what I'm going to do in this panel, which is literally just
just going to be a rectangle with a neckline, and as I'm crocheting side to side, that means all of my decreases will just be on one side. Starting off with decreases, what we'll do is we'll work in our slip stitches as normal, but what we're going to do is we're going to skip the final stitch in the row below. So currently I've done 54 because I'm ready to decrease, and then I'll do my turning chain, turn my work, and then working back down this row, I'm not going to do any decreases. So a good way to think about it is the decreases only happen at the end of your row, but not at the start of your row. So you would carry on this row as normal, and once I reach the bottom of my panel, I don't need to add any decreases or increases. If you remember earlier, we're only going to be increasing and decreasing at the top. So I decided to do a total of 3 decreases, and obviously this is happening every second row. So whilst I'm working up to the top or working towards the collar, that's where my decrease will happen. And then as I'm working back down, there'll be no decreases. Also, whilst creating this panel, remember that when you wear it, all of this will be stretched out, so you want to work with that in mind. So just a quick recap, including the chain length, I did a total of 12 rows at 55, before then doing 6 rows where I decreased a total of 3 stitches, and this is the slope that it has given me. And at this point I'm pretty happy with it all, so I'm just going to go straight along from this point on my panel to this point in my panel, which I'm pretty sure ended up being 20 rows of slip stitches before I was then ready to mirror this side with the side that I've already made. So I basically need to make up 3 stitches that I decreased on the other side. So to do my increases, what I'll do is I'll do an extra chain after my final stitch before then doing an extra chain as a turning chain and tighten that chain, but not the original one I did at the start. As you can see, the chain closest to my final stitch is still normal sized, so I can work into it before then working into the last slip stitch in the row below. So I would have taken my stitch count from a total of 52 slip stitches to 53 slip stitches. And I want to carry on doing this process till I get a total of 55, so that's going to be after 6 total rows. And then after that, I'm ready to mirror the stitches on the other side, and this will create a panel that looks something like this.
I've just finished making the front and back panel for the jumper, and I definitely was being very optimistic when I thought that I could make sleeves as well. That's definitely just not happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my whip pile and see if there's anything that I want to throw.
Originally I thought I had enough yarn to do the whole jumper in cream, but I very much didn't, so I decided to do the sleeves of my jumper in this yarn that was in one of my whips, but I just knew I would never complete it. I changed my hook size to an 8mm just because the yarn is a little bit thicker than the cream yarn, so I wanted it to still have that stretch. I started my arm panel off with 55 chains, and like last time I added that extra chain at the end and tightened it to act as a turning chain before I then start adding in my slip stitches. Now I'll kind of rush through this process a little bit just because it's kind of quite hard to see crocheting with colour changing yarn on video. So effectively we're just going to do the same thing, but the only thing that will change is how we do our increases and how we do our decreases. So what we're going to be doing is doing our increases first, because for this panel what I want to do is keep the bottom of it rectangular, but at the top make a little slope going up and then a slope going down. So what I'm going to do is add increases up to the midpoint of my panel. Then you want to have a couple of rows where everything is around the same length. So for me that was a total of 6 rows at the same stitch count before I then mirrored the other side and did all of my decreases. However many increases you did, you want to make the same amount of decreases, so you want to end up with the same amount of stitches that you did at the start. So for me that was 55 slip stitches, so I'm just going to make sure that I reach that and then my panel should be done. Right, now we've got all 4 of our panels ready. I'm just going to do a little bit of sewing to make things a little bit easier for myself. So I'm going to sew either side of the collar together on the front and back panel. This just means that I can drape it over myself and try it on, kind of to see what everything would look like once it is finished. And with the sleeves, I'm just going to sew together the seam to make 2 things that I can slip on my arm just to double check that I'm happy with everything, and then we can make decisions from there.
I have done my front and back panels and my sleeves, but at this point I actually think I want to change my design. The cream front and back panels, whilst I really like them and I think they're really cute, I'm not really sure it's the right fit for what I want to do with this jumper. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to remake the front and back panel. My plan is I'm just going to keep that front and back panel in my whip pile and I'm going to use it for one of my next jumpers. The game plan for this new panel is I'm going to keep the stitches and the rows the exact same. I just want to change the hook and yarn size. The yarn that I'm going to use, I'm going to go ahead and use this chunky yarn from a jumper that I made ages ago, but I just never ended up really wearing. And the yarn that this jumper uses is the same yarn that I used for the sleeves, just in a different colorway. So I just think it will look more cohesive together. As you know, with anything creative, part of the process is changing your mind and going back on yourself, which is fine because it is just part of the process. And for me, I always end up regretting when I don't actually take a step back and reassess the situation, because by the time that I finish my project, I actually don't really like it. But if I listen to my intuition throughout making it, it makes a project that I'm a lot happier with. While saying that, I actually have made this panel a total of 5 times now. So if this doesn't work out, I don't even want to think about how I feel, but we'll deal with that when it happens.
So I went ahead and made the panel despite my dog trying to distract me, and I'm really happy with how it ended up. I sewed together the sides of the panel and I'm just going to attach the sleeves, and I did this kind of roughly. I'm not the best sewer, so I'm not actually going to show you guys how I did it because you'll probably learn some bad habits that I have. Sewing's definitely something that I want to improve on next year.
For this jumper, I do want to add a few more details. I haven't really decided what exactly I want to do, so what I think I'm going to do is I'll just take you through the process and we'll see at the end what ends up happening.
We are at my favourite point of any crochet project, which is the finishing touches, which I decided I wanted to add some white 4-ply yarn around the cuffs, the waistband and the collar. And what I'm going to do is start off with a row of single crochets, and what I'll do is these kind of holes where there's just one piece of yarn above it, I'm going to do 2 single crochets into that hole before then moving on to the next one. So I'm technically doing 2 single crochets in every other row of slip stitches, but this is one of those things that you can customize this however you would like. But for me, I just work around the whole circumference before then slip stitching into the first stitch, chaining 2, turning my work, and I'm going to do a row of double crochets just to finish everything off. And basically you just want to work 1 stitch into each single crochet, and then once you reach the start of your row, you're going to slip stitch into the second chain you made in your turning chain, and that's going to be how we finish off this row. Obviously this step is completely optional, and I do think it looks cute just on its own. But also adding trimmings like this just makes your work look a little bit more professional. I also wanted to add a little applique, which I started off with this filet crochet design of a star, which I kind of tied on and didn't really like the look of, so I just scrapped the idea and decided to do some work with surface crochet instead. I've already got a video on how to surface crochet any design, so if you want to do this step as well, I would go ahead and check that video out.
Now I've added the surface crochet, I'm pretty sure that I'm happy with it, so I'm gonna leave that jumper as it is. Even though this jumper uses chunky yarn, it's not stiff at all. It fits really nicely and is super comfy to wear. It's super cozy and I'm definitely going to wear it a lot in winter. I would love to see your guys' take on this kind of pattern. Obviously you could do so many things with it. I've kept my jumper quite plain, but you could go ahead and add a lot more than I did, or you could keep the jumper just with the slip stitches. And yeah, I just think this is a really cute winter jumper. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful. Please make sure you like, comment and subscribe. I now post every Mondays. I also have an Etsy store that will be linked in the description down below, as well as all of my other social medias. Make sure you have a good rest of your day and I will see you in the next video. Bye.